Well, thanks so much for being here and for having me to speak near you and at you and with you about Luke Howard. And it's really amazing to have so many of his descendants in the room as well. Slightly unnerving, but I'm here really to talk about Luke Howard's meteorological legacy, the language of the skies that he bestowed to us just under 220 years ago. And of course, tomorrow is his 250th birthday. And what better way to remember his birth and also his meteorological legacy with a super spreader event like this. So, as so many of you will know, Luke Howard was born in the Old Street area of London, 28th of November 1772, and was sent away at a very young age to a Quaker boarding school at Burford in Oxfordshire, the Hillside Academy, which happily for all of us had a south-facing view over the wide Oxfordshire plain. And it was during his long, tedious school days where the curriculum was dominated by the rote learning of Latin. He said afterwards that my qualifications as a man of science are extremely slender. All I'd learned at school was Latin. I learned no mathematics. He remained a maths dunce for the remainder of his life. But as we will see, he fortunately picked up such a good working knowledge of Latin that he was able to apply this later in life to the naming of those fugitive subjects. So he spent hours staring out of the schoolroom windows, out of his bedroom window, and he says in his in a letter to Goethe from later in his life that he started to commit them to memory, commit forms and shapes of clouds to memory. And he was struck by particular appearances, what Gavin Peter-Pinney would later call clouds that looked like things, dragons and whales and sharks. And he was struck very profoundly by the 1783 Lackey Fissures event, which was a huge Icelandic eruption, a very slow but large eruption which sent masses of volcanic gases up into the atmosphere, which caused extraordinary sunsets all over Europe. And to a lot of consternation, huge amount of press interest. We will know from 2010 and the Eyjafjallajökull, which is not exactly how it's pronounced. I tried that in Iceland, then went to start. But I won't do the BBC thing of the unpronounceable volcano. It seems like that's just giving up. But we know from that experience how profound, how continental wide those kind of influences are. And Luke Howard, so he began to think and understand, thinking about the weather as a process, not just as local atmospheric appearances, but part of a larger atmospheric circulating system. That was really important for what he was later to do with the cloud names. So after school, he came back home and was sent, very much against his will, to Stockport near Manchester for a 7-year apprenticeship as a pharmacist. But in between the period of being at home, coming home from school and being sent away, he was aged about 14, 15, he set up a meteorological weather station in his parents' garden in Stamford Hills, not so far from here. And there was a little serpentine path. There was a very inaccurate thermometer, a rain gauge under a tree, and there was a small recording barometer. So this was known as the little serpentine path to that, from the house to the garden, was known as Luke's Walk. And I've been trying to find any kind of evidence on the ground in Stamford Hill of any traces. It's very unlikely that any traces of Luke's Walk. So if any of Luke Howard's descendants have anything to say about that, any kind of insight into that, I'm very, very pleased to hear about it. There's a little bit of, I'm sure there's a little bit of material culture, material history left of that. It would be fantastic to find it, even if it's just a hole in the ground, even if it's just a laurel bush under which he inadvisably put most of his instruments. And while he was at Stockport in Manchester, he did what so many young dissenters at the time. He was Quaker, and he associated with lots of other Quakers and Baptists and Unitarians and other non-members of the Church of England. If you were not a signature of the 39 Articles of the Church of England, you could not attend university, you could not become a member of any of the main trade guilds, you could not work within 5 miles of the city of London. Huge amounts of barriers were placed on the heads of those. So they did what so many people have done before, since to this day. They created their own forms of education. So when he came back, he co-founded the Ascasian Society. A friend of his, William Allen, who he met at a public science talk. And it was at the Ascasian Society in the 1790s that they took it in turns to give a talk on some subject that caught their interest. And Luke Howard, in December of 1802, he borrowed a horse. By this time he was living in Plaistow, then an Essex village across the malarial marshes out towards Plaistow. Now a 20-minute tube ride. And Margaret and I went to Plaistow last week, and Howard's Road, Plaistow named after him, now has an information board dedicated to it. It wasn't there last time I went. So there's something is happening around the 20th anniversary. And it was there during his walks to and from work. He worked at a chemical manufacturer's just down the road, literally down the road where he worked. And he said it was then that he began to resume his daily sub dio, he calls it, his daily walks under the heavens. And he continued his lifelong habit of taking twice daily weather readings, twice daily records. This fitted in, turn up. This fitted in with his outlook as a Quaker, fitted in as part of the kind of devotional habit, twice daily practice of taking weather records, fitted in absolutely with Quaker values of stillness and contemplation and record taking as well. As I often think, as a historian, I was so lucky and privileged to work on Luke Howard, not least because he had the clearest handwriting of any I've ever observed. It makes life so much easier. His writing is so clear, so distinct. I never had to reread a single line. Absolutely extraordinary. But so December 1802, it was Luke Howard's turn to give a talk. And the talk he gave was on the modifications of clouds. And it was based on his very simple but profound insight that clouds might have many different shapes, but very few basic forms. Lots of shapes, very few forms. In fact, he said all clouds belong to one of 3 main families of clouds, to which he gave the already existing Latin words, the descriptive Latin words, cirrus, meaning lock of hair or fibre, cumulus, meaning heap or pile, and half cut off stratus, meaning layer or sheet. Every other cloud was either a modification of or some kind of version of, an intermediate state of one of these 3 families. Now that wasn't the clever bit. In a way, just pointing at something and giving it a name is very rudimentary in itself. I said turn it up.
Sorry, taking pictures.
But all of these clouds are never at rest. No cloud is the same for more than a few minutes' time. Anybody who's tried to look at that, even these heavy blankets of nimbostratus, boom, which are hanging over us right now, even those, if you look at them for long enough, they change. The edges fray away, they change shape, they change form, they change colour and light and darkness and volume, all never at rest. And this is the problem with naming transitional forms in nature. They're changing while you're trying to name them. This is not like other forms of natural history and classification. If you come up with a name for a grey heron, for example, Ardea cinerea, it doesn't change its form while you're naming it. The problem with a cloud is that by the time you point to that cloud and go, oh look, it's a cirrus, I think it's a cirrus vibratus up there. By the time you've said that sentence, it's changed. So that wasn't the clever part, the Cirrus, Cumulus, Stratus and Nimbus. That wasn't the clever part. The clever part was the intermediate compound transitional forms. That's the clever part. Because there had been attempts to name clouds before Luke Howard. Only the year before, the luckless French natural philosopher Jean-Baptiste Lambert had come up with a series of very descriptive but beautiful names of clouds in French, Brumaire and so on. But for two reasons it didn't catch on. One, it was in French, at the height of the Napoleonic Wars. And secondly, it didn't accommodate these essential transformations of clouds. The fact that clouds rise, they fall, they dissipate, they disappear, they reappear in different forms all over the atmosphere while you're watching. So Luke Howard's mutable language of clouds accommodated this essential instability. So here is a cirrus cloud that begins to falls and begins to spread. Again becomes a cirrostratus. So you're using the strato form of the stratus and the cirro form of the cirrus, and you're pointing to the fact that here is a cirrus cloud that's changed from a thin wispy thing at the top of the sky to a slightly thicker, wider, less wispy thing in the middle of the sky. Similarly, a bunch of gregarious cumulus clouds that meet together and form a layer similarly become stratocumulus. And the great thing about those names as well is it also gives you a hint of altitude as well. So when later alto, meaning high, but in meteorological terms means medium, clouds were added. So you would know that an altocumulus is higher in the atmosphere than a stratocumulus. So you've got a whole load of information in these names. They're not just musical names, they're not just descriptive. They're full of information about relative heights, relative altitude, and also the visual characteristics of the clouds. It was absolutely brilliant piece of conceptual science. And the thing that Goethe, the great German polymath, scientist and poet, who was very excited by this, when the following year, 1803, Luke Howard's essay on the modifications of the clouds was published in the Philosophical Magazine, and it was translated very quickly into other European languages, into French, into German. And the German translation that Goethe got hold of, he said it's basically the missing link between observational science and the future of science. It was a massive claim. Very interesting claim as well. And one of the things that Goethe was very excited about was the fact that this piece of observational science would be done without instruments, purely naked eye research. And there was an interesting sort of romantic era quibble around instrumentation. There was, obviously this is a time of nascent instrumentation, and now of course meteorology without instruments is completely unthinkable, as well as implausible. But here was meteorology done without instruments. And Goethe said that's brilliant. Anybody who relies on their instruments is just simply taking the pulse of the atmosphere. This is actually finding its heart. It's a really lovely idea. I'm sure lots of meteorologists today would go, what is he talking about? But this was really Luke Howard's legacy, really, is this mutable language of clouds of the sky that accommodates essential instability and change. And it's what made his language of the sky so popular among artists and poets and writers, as well as among scientists as well. Shelley wrote a wonderful poem called The Cloud, which goes through all of Luke Howard's seven cloud states in turn. Very beautiful poem. If you don't know, I think it's up on Tottenham Clouds website. Yeah, go and have a look at it there. It's absolutely fantastic. I am the daughter of earth and sky. It's absolutely amazing. And famously, John Constable spent 2 summers on Hampstead Heath, obsessively painting and sketching clouds and skies, and he owned a copy of Luke Howard's cloud essay, and we know this. We know that he read it because it's covered in his annotation. Agreeing, disagreeing, question marks, what? People who write all over their books, librarians hate them, historians love them. So please continue to write all over your books, because one day there'll be a historian who goes, that's fantastic, that's what people at the time thought. And of course, since Luke Howard laid down those 7 cloud names in 1802, 1803, other names have been added. Now, the curious thing is, I mean, when I first started getting interested in Luke Howard and clouds and weather and environmental history, atmospheric history, I kind of assumed this was a purely historical matter. The clouds have been named, that's fantastic, I'm going to tell the story. I had no idea that this was going to be an ongoing project, that I would come to live through a kind of renaissance of cloud naming. So the first sort of inkling of this was when Gavin Peter-Pinney says, what about asperities? I'll come on to that in a second. So, and the most recent International Cloud Atlas, published in 2017, contained no fewer than 12 new cloud names. Not 12 new clouds, exactly, but 12 new cloud names. And there were lots of, and during Luke Howard's lifetime, and immediately after, there were lots of new names and new cloud varieties, and kind of tweaks to the classification were added. So we had alticumulus, as I mentioned, added in the 1840s, I think, 1850s. You had cumulonimbus, which is one of my favourite cloud names, was added by the German meteorologist Philip Weilbach in 1880, which is why it couldn't, as we said earlier. I'm going to skip through this one. I love the Met Office's suggested pronunciation guide. First time I read this, it made me feel like a slight head injury. But yeah, so cirrocumulus is the great, tall, towering thundercloud which goes through all of the sky altitude bands. So by the 1890s, by 1896, the International Year of Clouds, the first official International Cloud Atlas was produced. Luke Howard's 7-fold classification had been added to, another 10, and it remains a 10-fold cloud structure. And you'll see it's divided into altitude bands, as hinted at by Luke Howard's original three-part cloud family groupings of stratus, cumulus, and cirrus. Cirrus being the highest, and stratus being the lowest. This cumulonimbus, which is the one that penetrates all of the the atmospheric altitude bands, and it's where lots of our most dramatic weather and other kinds of atmospheric events generate from. And cumulonimbus was also the 9th cloud in the register. Why? To be on cloud 9 means to be on top of the earth, top of the atmosphere. But cumulonimbus wasn't one of Luke Howard's original names for the clouds. It was added in the 1880s, which is why Sally Wainwright really shouldn't have used it in Gentleman Jack. It's a fantastic historical drama series based on the diaries of Anne Lister. Has anyone watched Gentleman Jack? Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. This is absolutely not a dig at Sally Wainwright and Gentleman Jack, but it did make me laugh. I'm not one of those people who writes in to the BBC. The actor playing Nelson was wearing the wrong style of buttons on his mess coat. But maybe it'll come. You know, maybe that's down the line for me. I'll start growing hair up my ears and start writing the BBC. But Gentleman Jack was set in the 1830s, and there's an I Spy game happening in the carriage with the Priestley family on their way to see Anne Lister. And C is for cumulonimbus, as Amelia Bullymore playing Eliza Priestley in the drama. And so of course, that word was 50 years in the future. It's just a little observation. Not a serious critique at all. Fantastic series. But yeah, I mentioned, so asparagus, this was, so over the years, new cloud names added to the lexicon. The last one before the 12 new ones was 1951 in tortoise, meaning twisted, often applied to cirrus cloud. So I assumed, writing in the early 21st century, that this was basically a historical, I was telling a story that had an end to it. And little did I know that there's no end to this at all. I've learned a great deal about that kind of historical assumption. And so yeah, Gavin Priest-Pinney. So the Cloud Appreciation Society is not only kind of a wonderful organisation in and of its own right. I'm a very proud member. I'm wearing my badge today. Featuring cirrus clouds, which are the only clouds that Luke Howard, of course, could never have seen. No, it's not cirrus. Contrails. Yeah. They are a form of cirrus cloud. Yeah. Cirrus homogenitus, as they are now known. But it's also, the Cloud Appreciation Society is also a kind of photographic archive, and a register of citizen scientists and observers around the world. And the Cloud Appreciation Society photo inbox started getting lots of these coming. Maybe Gavin, you'd like to say a bit about this.
Oh, well.
Yeah. So you started getting these very interesting, unusual cloud forms. It didn't have a name. And that's the thing, is that, so when I did the Met Office cloud book in 2008, and that's basically adhered to the official World Meteorological Organization cloud classification at that time. And going through all these photo archives and picture archives, kept coming across clouds that didn't quite fit in the classification. And I'd go to the people at Met Office and I'd say, what about this cloud? And they go, can you just put that to one side? I think this is a bit strange. And I did, and I was so perturbed by it. I'm coming towards you, not in any intention to your theatre. I was so perturbed by this that I persuaded them to do a kind of a second volume called Extraordinary Clouds, which is basically all the clouds that didn't fit in cloud classification. There's a lot of them, including, here's a wonderful image of what's now called asparagus. Absolutely amazing cloud. And I had a long correspondence with the photographer, because obviously, like you must be doing, I strongly suspected photoshopping going on here. And as I say in the introduction, I'm not interested in keenness photoshoppers. I'm interested in real clouds. And she showed me a whole load of photos and plus some video footage of this in Iowa. But there was no name for it. So I've just put, I quoted an American meteorologist saying, let's just call them silver wave clouds. This book came out in 2009, a sort of blooper reel of the atmosphere. But luckily, and there's quite a few other clouds in there that have subsequently been named or renamed. But some of them had unofficial names that they've now got official names. This was the first one that Gavin came up with, asparagus, from a line in Virgil. This sounds very fancy, doesn't it? From a line in Virgil, I was happy to read Virgil. but from Latin for roughened, or roughness, and asparagus. There's a very long kind of version. There's a long version of this and there's a short version. But the short version is that it took a long time for this to be accepted, and there's a lot of stages that had to go through. So you had to persuade the Royal Meteorological Society and Reading University meteorology department. Somebody wrote a thesis about that. It's always nice when someone gets a thesis out. And then that had to be taken to the World Meteorological Organization in Geneva. And there's a sort of panel of unsmiling people going, And they go, for about 8 years. But there was a sort of an official acceptance moment, which was sort of live streamed. And that was absolutely amazing. What's that?
10 minutes left.
Oh, 10 minutes left. I thought we just written the number 10. I'm so pleased with it. So we have 10 minutes left. I think we've got time just to go through all 12 of the new cloud names. So this one took ages and ages and ages. Some of them, the others didn't take quite so long, as far as I'm aware. But a lot of these names are in Extraordinary Clouds. I'm sorry, a lot of these names are not in Extraordinary Clouds, but the clouds are. Which just shows that in that 10-year period, how much has changed in not just in meteorology and cloud naming, but also in understanding atmosphere and climate as well. It's, all of these things are connected. So another of the 12 is Lordship, which is the roll cloud. Absolutely amazing. You've seen this, haven't you? In the end of the Cloud Spotter's Guide, there's a lovely sort of after chapter about going in search of the roll cloud. I've never seen this. It's absolutely fantastic. That's now called Volutus. So these used to be called full streak holes or hole punch clouds. I've got a couple of those in Extraordinary Clouds. But as of 2017, officially known as carvum, from the Latin meaning hole. Hole. O-L-E. Hole. We're in Tottenham. It's not entirely known how they are created. I mean, it's possibly something to do with aircraft. Exhaust. This is taken in my back garden in Walthamstow. Cirrus homogenitus, which is so these have been obviously been called contrails or vapor trails. There was an attempt a few years ago to call them Cirrus aviaticus, but they are now Cirrus homogenitus, meaning human-made. So if they spread out and persist over the atmosphere, and you see this quite a lot. It's now one of the most commonly seen cloud types in the Northern Hemisphere. These huge spread out contrails, and those are known as Cirrus homomutatus. Interesting, right? So, yeah, Kelvin Helmholtz wave clouds, as these used to be called. So you do see this time. In fact, Gavin and I saw some together when we went to London with Helen as well. We saw some of these on the way back. It's absolutely amazing. It's like a sort of cloud. It's like specially laid on for the cloud appreciation. But they have been renamed Fluctus, from Latin for fluid. Yeah. Flowing. So they're caused by wind shear. Very, very interesting. They look exactly like waves. Very beautiful, exciting. Because they're quite unusual. We've got Murus, which is previously known as a wall cloud, and often are associated with large supercell thunderstorm systems. Now it's got its own Latin, Murus, meaning not difficult. Here's two for one here. We've got a tail and a stream, a cauda and a stream. And these are again associated with large supercell thunderstorm systems. You see them beautifully in North America. There's a whole community of cloud chasers, storm chasers in the States who are really after these kind of highly photogenic structures. But meteorologically they're very interesting, and there's a sort of classic beaver's tail here, which is now known as a cauda. But it doesn't mean you can't still call it a beaver's tail. This is interesting. So pyrocumulus, as it used to be called, as of 2017 known as Flamma genitus. Any idea why the WMO are not happy with the name pyrocumulus and much prefer Flamma genitus?
Because pyro is Greek, not Latin.
Yeah.
Correct. First answer. We've only got 10 minutes. Oh, we've got 5 minutes left. Pyro is Greek, chemist is Latin, and they don't like the mixture. It's like what C.P. Scott, editor of the Manchester Guardian, said about television. The word is half Greek, half Latin. No good will ever come of it. I think the WMO think much the same about this. One of my favourites, silver genitus. So those wispy clouds that you get above forest canopies and woodlands, often early in the morning, but it's not just mist rising, they actually are cloud forming. Stratus cloud forming, absolutely beautiful. From Latin silver meaning woods. And finally, my favourite of all, Cataractogenesis, which has this fantastic Gilbert and Sullivan cadence to it. Cataractogenesis, which again is a naturally occurring cloud type, occurring above waterfalls. For years this was known unofficially as a Niagara cloud, but now it's been taken into the official cloud language. And it's extraordinary to think that here are naturally occurring cloud forms that people around the world have observed and witnessed for millennia, only just been named for science. Obviously they had local names in local and indigenous language, and there's a question to be asked about the kind of the project of steamrolling all over local languages with scientific Latin. But we can think of it as adding rather than taking away, I hope. And I think it'd be a project that I'm aiming to do is to collect all of the other cloud names that were there before the Latin came along, Western Latin came along, but it'd be a huge project. So Luke Howard's mutable language of the sky, but he quietly introduced in 1802 with those initial 4 words, cirrus, cumulus, stratus, nimbus, have flourished into this enormous, capacious, descriptive language that we all use every day. So thinking about Luke Howard's legacy, which I know Margaret is thinking about daily, really. So we have this. We have Luke Howard's blue plaque. I went to the unveiling in 2002. Michael Fish pulled the rope. But the building is derelict. It's been, I don't know, planning approval for flats. I don't know what's going on. But at the moment, it's covered in tarpaulin. But somebody, unknown, has erected a banner in honour of Luke Howard, which we passed this morning. So who knows? But the worst thing about this building is there aren't even any clouds. Luke Howard would not be happy.
There's more details about Severn Bruce Grove in your programme.
Yay! So yeah, we have a very weird thing in Britain of celebrating our great sort of visionaries and poets and writers. So yeah, Hogarth has a roundabout named after him on the 1850s. John Clare, one of my favourite poets, has a car park in Northampton, which just seems cruel. And Luke Howard has a falling down building with his name on it. But let's see what we can do better. And at the 500th anniversary of Luke Howard's birth, we'll all be looking at something shiny and made of chrome. But thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.